Why even invite her? She's the family's black sheep. My sister's voice cut through the clinking glasses, and the whole table froze. I felt every pair of eyes slice into me like I was a stain on the tablecloth. My hands were cold, but I didn't snap back. Instead, I set a small wooden box down beside the turkey, its scratched lid catching the light. I leaned forward just enough for my voice to carry. "Funny," I said, "calm, you might want to hear what Mom left inside." The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Glasses rattled. Even the football game on TV seemed to hush. They thought I'd stay quiet like always. Not this time. What was in that box would turn Thanksgiving into something no one at that table would ever forget. I'm Rachel Miller. I'm 29 years old, and I've spent most of my life learning how to be invisible. On paper, I should be doing fine. I work as a nurse practitioner at a busy clinic near Mass General in Boston. I pay my bills, I rent a tiny studio in Jamaica Plain, and I keep my head down. But in my family, none of that has ever counted. Victoria, my older sister, is the crown jewel. She's 32, a lawyer who never misses a chance to tell the room how many hours she billed this month. My father beams when she speaks. My aunts clap like she's giving a TED Talk, and my cousins whisper about her salary as if it's royalty money. When it comes to me, they nod politely and change the subject. Nursing must be tiring, they say, the way you'd talk about cleaning out gutters. I learned early what being the second choice feels like. One winter when I was 9, both my parents rushed Victoria to a debate competition. They were so busy getting her suit pressed and her hair curled that they forgot me at the bus stop. I stood there in the freezing dark breath coming out like smoke fingers stiff inside my wet gloves, while snow piled on my backpack. By the time they remembered, I had counted every crack in the curb and promised myself I'd never beg for their attention again. Those cracks in the pavement never left me. They followed me into every holiday meal, every birthday party, every moment Victoria was toasted, and I was treated like the unpaid staff. She got a new Civic when she turned 16. I got a stack of used SAT books with Post-it notes still stuck inside. She got an apartment in Cambridge when she started law school. I got a lecture about learning to manage with less. Thanksgiving has always been the altar where this favoritism was displayed. The family doesn't just eat turkey. They put on a performance. The table gets dressed in lace, the wine bottles lined up like soldiers, and the speeches drag on about tradition and sacrifice. You don't miss Thanksgiving, not unless you want to be branded ungrateful. This year felt heavier, maybe because it was the second one without my mom. She had passed 2 years ago at Mass General, her last breath rattling against the white hospital sheets while I held her hand. My sister wasn't there. She was in court, too tied up to get away. Mom left me something that night, a small wooden box with a tiny silver key tied on a ribbon. Her voice was weak, but I remember every word. Keep it until you truly need it. I tucked it away on my bookshelf and never touched it. Not until tonight. Outside of family drama, my own life wasn't perfect. I was drowning in student loans. I picked up extra shifts at the clinic chasing overtime pay while my friends planned trips to Cape Cod. My ex walked out last year saying I lacked ambition, saying he couldn't stand being with someone who had no fire. He meant I wasn't Victoria. On top of that, my dad started asking me for small favors. Could I help with the grocery bill for Thanksgiving? Could I spot him a few hundred for the leaky roof? We'll pay you back, he promised, though. The payback never came. Every month, my account shrank while Victoria bragged about closing another real estate deal. The texts in our family group chat made it worse. Plans for Thanksgiving circulated. Victoria was buying wine. Dad was writing a toast. My aunt was bringing pumpkin pie. My role, Rachel, will handle grocery shopping and cleanup. No mention of me sitting down as part of the celebration. Just labor the same as always. Still, there was one person who saw me, my grandmother. She's quieter now, her steps slower, but her eyes miss nothing. Last year, she pressed a faded photograph of my mom into my hand. Behind it, taped to the back, was an old brass key. In case you need to open the attic, she said, her voice like paper crinkling. I didn't ask why. Later, I went up there alone and found boxes of tax receipts, old deeds, and a weathered envelope with my mother's handwriting. I didn't open it. I wasn't ready. But the hints kept stacking. I saw my sister scrolling through Zillow making comments about property in this area selling for millions. I heard my dad muttering about simplifying the deed before winter. Then a PDF appeared in the family chat, something about a quitclaim. They must have thought I wouldn't notice, or they assumed I'd sign without asking questions. I didn't. Instead, I began writing things down. The groceries I bought, the bills I covered, the nights I stayed late at the clinic so I could slip cash into Dad's hand. I started a file in my laptop titled Simply House. Line by line, I built my quiet case. All of that brought me to tonight, to this dinner, to the moment Victoria threw her insult across the table and thought I would sit in silence. But silence was no longer safety. Silence was erasure. So I placed the wooden box down next to the turkey, right under the glow of the chandelier. My sister's smirk cracked just a little, and I thought, this year Thanksgiving won't end the way they expect. After Mom's funeral, the imbalance in my family stopped being subtle. It became a constant grind, like a leaky faucet you hear in every room. Most days, I was the one holding things together. If Thanksgiving was coming, I bought the produce, the cream, the spices. Grocery receipts piled in my purse, little slips of proof no one cared about. My paycheck stretched thin between student loan payments and clinic rent, but I kept paying because no one else would. Meanwhile, Victoria arrived to every gathering like it was a press conference. She'd sweep in wearing a designer coat, balancing her phone, narrating her cases. I closed a 6-figure deal today, she'd announce, and the table would erupt in praise. My father would refill her wine before her glass even hit the table. When she caught me scrubbing a pan in the sink, she smirked. At least you're good with your hands. I pretended not to hear, but inside, something cracked. The manipulation grew bolder. One evening, my father called me while I was on break at the clinic. I was standing in the staff lounge, fluorescent light, buzzing above, trying to inhale a granola bar before my next patient. His voice came low and urgent. "Honey, I need you to sign a quick form. Just a roofing repair thing. No big deal." I knew better. "Send it to me first," I said. He paused. "Rachel, you don't trust your own dad." That sting of guilt was his favorite weapon. But I'd learned. The PDF he finally sent had quitclaim deed written across the top. Not a roofing bill. Not a minor fix. A legal document designed to erase me from ownership of the house. I didn't sign. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my apartment listening to the radiator hiss, staring at the wooden box on my shelf. The ribbon still knotted around the tiny silver key. Mom's voice echoed in my head. "Keep it until you truly need it." My hands itched to open it, but I forced myself to wait. Timing mattered. Flashbacks invaded me in moments I least expected. Once I was back at 13 on New Year's Eve. Victoria was posing for photos in a sequined dress, glasses of sparkling cider raised around her. I was in the kitchen up to my elbows in suds, scrubbing greasy plates because someone had to. Dad peeked in, chuckled, and said, "Rachel, you're so dependable." Dependable. The family's polite way of saying invisible. Other times I remembered being 16, fever burning through me alone on a bus ride to urgent care because everyone else was at Victoria's tennis tournament. The bus smelled of wet coats and disinfectant, and I pressed my forehead to the window until the glass felt cold enough to keep me upright. Those memories weren't just painful, they were warnings, proof of a pattern that would never change. Grandma was the only one who seemed to notice. One Sunday after church, she pulled me aside. Her hand, frail and warm, slipped a faded photograph of Mom into mine. Taped to the back was a brass key, heavy and tarnished. "It's for the attic," she whispered, "in case you need to look for answers." That night, I climbed the creaky attic stairs alone. Dust rose in clouds as I pulled open boxes. Among Christmas ornaments and yellowed tax forms, I found an envelope with my mother's handwriting. The edges were brittle, the ink smudged. I didn't open it then. I just pressed it to my chest, heart racing before slipping it back under the pile. Some things needed the right moment, but the cracks in their scheme showed. Screenshots from the family chat proved they'd been discussing the house without me. "Once we settle the deed, we can list it by spring," Victoria typed. My dad replied, Don't mention this to Rachel, she'll get emotional. My role was written in black and white, the excluded one. So I began documenting every grocery bill, every roof repair I paid, every favor that drained me. I made a folder on my laptop labeled House a Quiet Rebellion. Evidence stacked up line by line. Still, they kept pressing. Rachel, just sign already, my father said at a Sunday dinner. It's just paperwork, Victoria added with a shrug. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I looked at them both across the table, mashed potatoes cooling on my plate, and forced myself to smile. Not yet. Inside, my pulse hammered. Because I knew what I had. Because I knew I wasn't walking into Thanksgiving empty-handed this year. Thanksgiving loomed closer, and every text from the family chat tightened my chest. The chatter was all logistics, wine pairings, seating charts, who was making cranberry sauce. Buried in the middle of the thread was a line that turned my stomach. Dad will finalize papers after dessert. They weren't hiding it anymore. They were scheduling my erasure. At the clinic between patients, I scrolled back through those messages until the words blurred. The smell of antiseptic clung to my scrubs, the kind of smell you never shake even after you've showered twice. I thought of how many double shifts I'd pulled, how many times I'd sent money home while Victoria bragged about bonuses. And now they wanted to sign me away like I was a broken appliance. One evening I sat at my tiny kitchen table, bills spread out around me. Student loans, utilities, a late fee from my credit card. I ran my fingers over the wooden box. The silver key caught the light of my desk lamp, throwing a line of brightness across the bills. I whispered to the empty apartment, "Not yet, but soon." Grandma called the next day. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Rachel, don't let them corner you. Your mother was smarter than they gave her credit for." "What do you mean?" I asked. "She left things in order," Grandma said. "She trusted you to know when to speak. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me steady." Flashbacks crept in, again sharper now. I remembered being 21, home from college for Christmas. Victoria was unwrapping a new laptop, the kind with the shiny logo still glowing on the lid. I unwrapped a sweater 3 sizes too big, the tag still showing it had been on clearance. Everyone laughed at the mismatch. "Oh, Rachel, you'll grow into it," Dad said. But I was already grown, and I realized then gifts were never about me. They were about reminding me where I stood. That memory bled into others the way Victoria used to call me Dependable Rachel with a smirk. How Dad liked to joke that I was the practical one while he toasted Victoria's brilliance. Dependable, practical, invisible. The week before Thanksgiving, Victoria cornered me outside the house. The air was sharp with the smell of damp leaves, her heels clicking against the driveway. She handed me a manila folder. "Just sign," she said. "You'll make this so much easier." I glanced at the papers. Quitclaim deed again. My name lined up neatly beside a blank signature line. "No," I said. "Just that one word." Her lips tightened. "Don't play stubborn, Rachel. You don't even want this house." She was wrong. I didn't want the walls or the roof or the mortgage headaches. What I wanted was what the house represented, my mother's last act of fairness. I walked away, folder still in her hand. My legs shook, but I didn't look back. That night, I opened the laptop and added another entry to the house folder. Novi 21. Victoria tried to push quitclaim again, refused. My fingers trembled, but the words steadied me. Days later, I visited the attic one more time. Dust coated my hair, cobwebs clung to my sleeves. I pulled out the envelope I'd seen before and finally slid a letter opener under the flap. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, my mother's handwriting shaky but clear. "Rachel, this house is yours. I trust you to protect it. Don't let them take it from you." Tears blurred the ink, but I read it twice, 3 times. At the bottom was a copy of a codicil and official amendment to her will, notarized, signed. I pressed the papers against my chest, heart pounding. The attic smelled of cedar and dust, but in that moment it felt like oxygen. For the first time, I realized Mom hadn't left me defenseless. She had given me the weapon I needed. I sealed the envelope back into the wooden box, locked it with the tiny silver key, and set it on my desk. The box wasn't just a keepsake anymore. It was leverage. Thanksgiving would no longer be their stage. it would be mine. The dining room shimmered under the chandelier polished silverware, laid in rows, wine glasses catching the glow. Outside, Boston's November wind rattled the windows, but inside the heat of the oven and the smell of rosemary coated everything. Turkey mashed potatoes, pumpkin pie, it looked like a Norman Rockwell painting, only underneath something sour pulsed. I slid into my seat, the wooden box resting beside me like a loaded gun no one else noticed. Victoria's laugh rang out across the table, high and rehearsed. Some of us work 12-hour days this week, she announced, swirling her glass. That's why this house needs a real plan. Dad, don't you agree? He nodded, clearing his throat. Family comes first, and this property, it represents all of us. We can't afford complications. His eyes cut toward me. Forks scraped against plates, conversations faltered. Then he pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and placed it in the center of the table. Rachel, if you'd just sign this, we can keep everything simple. I stared at the envelope. Quitclaim deed. I already knew. Victoria leaned forward, voice sugar-coated. It's just a formality. Everyone's on board. Don't make a scene. My pulse drummed in my ears, but I kept my hands steady. I brushed a crumb from the edge of the wooden box and said nothing. Rachel, Dad pressed. You've always been dependable. Don't let us down now. There it was, that word again. Dependable. The leash they'd used all my life. I unlatched the box. The tiny key clicked louder than the clinking silverware. Gasps rippled around the table as I lifted the lid. Inside lay the folded letter and the notarized codicil. Victoria's smile faltered. What's that? I slid the papers onto the tablecloth right beside the cranberry sauce. Mom's voice, I said. She made sure this house wouldn't be stolen. Dad barked a laugh, brittle and sharp. A letter. That's sentiment, not law. I pushed the codicil forward. It's notarized, signed, filed with her lawyer. My tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. The weight of the document spoke for me. The room stiffened. My aunt squinted. My cousin whispered, "Is that real?" Victoria reached across the table, but Grandma's hand shot out thin but firm. "Don't," she said. Then her eyes found mine. "I was there. I watched your mother sign. Rachel's telling the truth." Silence swallowed the room. The football game on the TV in the next room hummed faintly like background static to the collapse of their performance. Victoria's voice cracked. "This is ridiculous. She's manipulating all of you." I met her glare. "Funny. That's what you've been doing for years." Dad slammed his hand against the table, rattling glasses. "You'll tear this family apart." I leaned back, calm. "No, I'm done letting you tear me apart." For the first time in my life, I wasn't begging, wasn't defending. I was holding the cards. Grandma lifted the codicil, her wrinkled hands trembling but steady enough to place it back in the box. She looked at my father, then Victoria. "Enough. Your mother chose. Respect it." The table buzzed with murmurs, chairs shifting, forks abandoned. Victoria sat, frozen lips parted, her power cracked open like the turkey's brittle skin. I could have gloated. I could have thrown every insult back at them. Instead, I whispered the only thing that mattered. This house is mine. Not because I asked for it, because Mom wanted it, and you don't get to erase me anymore. No one moved. The chandelier hummed faintly, its bulbs flickering in the draft. Even the children in the living room stopped laughing as if the walls themselves held their breath. Victoria finally stood, napkin crumpling in her fist. "You'll regret this." I closed the box with a soft snap. Maybe, but not tonight. The fight was over, not because they gave up, but because they'd been cornered by the truth. For once, the silence that followed wasn't suffocating. It was power. I rose from my chair, the box tucked under my arm. My legs were steady, my heart light for the first time in years. The night air outside smelled of frost and smoke from a neighbor's chimney. I breathed it in like freedom. Behind me, the house that had always made me feel small now echoed with their disbelief. And ahead of me, I carried my mother's final word, the one they couldn't twist, erase, or steal. Because this time, the secret was mine. I didn't sleep much that night. The image of Victoria's face, frozen color draining, replayed in my head like a movie on loop. For years, I'd imagined what it would feel like to finally stand my ground. I thought it would be rage or triumph. But the truth was quieter. It was like finally setting down a heavy bag I'd been carrying since childhood. Still, the fight wasn't over. Families like mine don't back down because of one dinner. They regroup, rewrite the story, paint me as the villain. I knew the storm was coming, so I prepared. The next morning, I laid everything out on my kitchen table. The codicil, the notarized seal, Mom's letter, the photograph Grandma had given me, my receipts, groceries, repairs, all the invisible ways I had supported the house. I scanned each page, naming every file carefully, and saved backups in the cloud. I wasn't going to let lost paperwork become another excuse. Then I called Mom's old lawyer. My voice shook when I introduced myself, but he remembered her immediately. "Your mother was thorough," he said. "She wanted you protected." Hearing that almost broke me, but I swallowed hard and set an appointment. At the probate court, I filed a petition to recognize the codicil. The clerk stamped my documents, the sound sharp as a gavel. For the first time, the system wasn't tilted against me. I had something real. It didn't take long for the backlash to start. My phone lit up with calls I didn't answer. Dad left me a voicemail, his tone swinging from pleading to furious. "You don't understand what you're doing. This will ruin us. You'll regret it." Victoria texted paragraphs at 2 in the morning, demanding explanations, accusing me of betrayal. She even tried the guilt card, "Mom would be ashamed of you." I didn't reply. Instead, I saved every message. Proof not poison. Word spread fast. A neighbor cornered me outside the clinic one afternoon, voice hushed. I heard there's trouble about the house. Is it true? I just smiled tightly and said, "Ask them." I wasn't going to argue my worth in the parking lot. Meanwhile, Victoria's carefully polished image began to crack. Her firm discovered she'd tried to represent Dad while also having a personal stake in the property. Conflict of interest. They told her to step aside. She tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, but I knew the truth. The power she'd flaunted for years was slipping. Dad fared no better. He complained to the church committee, calling me greedy, but gossip circles move fast. People whispered about how often I'd covered his bills, how many times I'd shown up when Victoria hadn't. Slowly, the narrative turned. The dependable daughter wasn't so invisible anymore. At home, I changed my locks. Not because I expected them to barge in, but because I needed the ritual, fresh keys cold in my palm like a promise. I taped a copy of the temporary restraining order to the inside of the door, right next to the peephole. Anyone who wanted to argue could take it up with the court. For weeks, they tested me. Calls escalated. Emails poured in. One message dripped with sarcasm. "Congratulations, you've killed Thanksgiving." Another tried to lure me back. "We'll cut you in if you just back off." Then came the threats. "You'll be sorry when the lawyers finish with you." But I had already learned the most important rule: don't argue document. Every message went into my folder. Every voicemail transcribed. I didn't rise to their bait. Silence became my armor. In the meantime, I focused on building a life outside their shadow. I took Grandma in for a few weeks while she recovered from a fall. My tiny apartment became crowded with the smell of her lavender lotion and the sound of her humming old hymns. For once, I felt like family wasn't a trap. It was a choice. I also stopped paying for the little things. No more grocery runs on my dime. No more loans for repairs. The drain they had on me was cut off and the freedom was immediate. For the first time in years, I could breathe without checking my balance twice. When the court date finally arrived, I walked into the probate office with the wooden box in my arms. The codicil was entered into record, Grandma testified, and the judge confirmed that the house would remain in my name. It wasn't a dramatic scene. No shouting, no slam doors, just ink paper and law finally catching up to truth. Victoria stormed out before the session ended. Dad sat hunched, face pale. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply picked up the box and walked out the winter air, stinging my cheeks. Justice didn't look like revenge. It looked like clarity. It looked like finally drawing a line no one else could cross. That night, back in my apartment, I brewed coffee and sat by the window watching snow drift down onto the streetlights. My phone buzzed with another message from Victoria, but I didn't open it. I didn't need to. For once, I wasn't living on their terms. And as I set the box on my bookshelf, I realized something Mom must have known all along the house wasn't just wood and brick. It was proof that I mattered even if my family tried to erase me. They couldn't erase me anymore. Winter settled heavy over Boston. The Charles River froze in places, thin sheets of ice catching the pale morning sun. I jogged along the edge on Saturday's breath, puffing white in the air, my headphones pumping low music. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running away. I was simply running forward. Back at my apartment, light poured through the kitchen window, spilling across the counter, where a small basil plant leaned toward the warmth. The wooden box sat on the shelf, closed and quiet. I didn't need to open it anymore. Its weight wasn't a secret pressing down on me. It was a reminder that I had chosen myself. I decided not to live in the old house. Too many ghosts, too much dust soaked in old arguments. Instead, I kept it in my name, secured by the court's ruling. I rented out the bottom floor to a young nurse just starting her career. She paid modest rent, and I used part of it to start a scholarship fund at the local community college in my mother's memory. Her name lived on in something clean, not in whispered fights over inheritance. Grandma came over most Sundays. We drank tea, ate simple meals, and she told stories about when she was a girl. No pressure, no judgment, just presence. Sometimes I caught her watching me with a soft smile, as if she saw the line of women in our family finally shift course. My father and sister stayed distant. I heard rumors Victoria working overtime to rebuild her reputation, Dad keeping quieter in church. Occasionally, a message would slip through another guilt trip, another attempt at rewriting history. I didn't bite. Silence was my final answer. The lesson was sharp, but clear. Family isn't always safety. Sometimes it's the fire you have to step out of to breathe again. For years, I let myself be erased, told I was practical, dependable, invisible. But Mom knew better. She left proof that I mattered, and when the time came, I used it. Not to destroy them, but to save myself. One evening, I walked past the old house. Lights glowed from the windows, laughter spilling faintly into the street. Tenants now not blood. I smiled. The house had become what it was always meant to be, a place where someone belonged. I turned my collar against the cold and kept walking. My life wasn't grand, wasn't glossy like Victoria's, but it was mine. My paycheck stretched far enough my apartment was warm and my nights were quiet. I was no longer the black sheep. I was simply Rachel, and that was enough. So I'll leave you with this question. If your family ever called you the black sheep and you held the truth in your hands, would you stay silent or would you finally let it speak? If this story hit you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next one.